Imagine a man who lived on the margins of society, a man who slipped unnoticed through the cracks of post-war Germany. He was short, crooked, and odd-looking. Someone people laughed at, someone they overlooked. But behind his awkward smile and drunken stumbles hid something far darker. Now imagine a tiny apartment in Hamburg. The walls are stained from years of smoke. The air is thick with the sour stench of alcohol and something else. Something rotting, something unnatural. Neighbors complain about the smell. Some blame it on cats. Others blame it on garbage. But the truth was worse, much worse. Inside that apartment, behind a locked door, lay the dismembered remains of women. Women society had ignored. Women Fritz Honka had lured from the pub, called Zum Goldenen Handschuh, or the Golden Glove. And Chapter 1, A Childhood in Ruins. Friedrich Paul Fritz Honka was born on July 31st, 1935 in Leipzig, Germany. The world he was born into was already burning. Adolf Hitler's grip on Germany was at its peak. War consumed everything. Families were torn apart. Hunger and fear were daily companions. Fritz's childhood was nothing short of tragic. His father, a stoker by trade, was arrested for political reasons and later sent to a concentration camp. His mother was overwhelmed, trying to raise several children in a time when food was scarce and bombings were constant. Fritz was a small child, frail, with a face that others mocked. He developed a squint in one eye after an early accident, giving him an awkward, crooked look that would stay with him for life. Children teased him. Adults dismissed him. Growing up in the chaos of war, Fritz never felt safe. He learned early on that he was weaker than others, that he didn't belong. Those feelings of rejection would fester and follow him into adulthood. By the time the war ended in 1945, Fritz was just 10 years old, but he was already broken by hunger, loss, and abandonment. Chapter 2, Growing Up Broken. The post-war years did little to heal Fritz. Germany was in ruins. Families struggled to rebuild. Fritz was placed in a youth home, where discipline was harsh and affection was scarce. As a teenager, he tried to work simple jobs. Gardening, construction, anything he could find. But his small stature and crooked face made him the butt of jokes. He wasn't strong, he wasn't handsome, and he wasn't popular. He began drinking young, using alcohol to hide his insecurities. It made him feel braver, less invisible. But it also made him clumsy and violent. By his 20s, Fritz had moved around constantly. He drifted through East Germany, eventually escaping to the West. He hoped for a better life, but he carried his demons with him. Relationships were short-lived. Women didn't find him attractive. He tried visiting sex workers, but even there, he was mocked for his looks and his weak performance. His failures with women cut deep. He began resenting them, blaming them for his own feelings of inadequacy. This resentment, mixed with loneliness and alcohol, created a dangerous man. Chapter 3, The Lonely Man in Hamburg. By the late 1960s, Fritz had settled in Hamburg, specifically in the St. Pauli district. This neighborhood was famous for its nightlife, its brothels, and its port workers. It was a place where sailors, drinkers, and outcasts mixed freely. It was also a place where women on the margins, sex workers, alcoholics, the homeless, were easy targets. Fritz moved into a small, shabby apartment at 68 Zeissstrasse. The place was barely livable, tiny, dark, and filled with the smell of cigarettes and cheap booze. But for Fritz, it was home. He spent most of his nights at the Zum Goldenen Handschuh, a rundown pub in St. Pauli. The bar was infamous, was filled with drunks, sailors, and prostitutes. The walls were yellow with smoke, the floors sticky with spilled beer. This pub became Fritz's hunting ground. To the regulars, Fritz was just another sad drunk. He was awkward with his crooked face and squint, but harmless, or so they thought. He often sat in the corner, drinking quietly, staring at women who had seen better days. What they didn't know was that Fritz wasn't looking for company. He was looking for victims. Chapter 4. The Pub. Zum Goldenen Handschuh. The Golden Glove was no glamorous nightclub. It was a place for society's leftovers. The old, the lonely, the addicted. Fritz found comfort there because he wasn't judged. Among the drunks and the forgotten, he blended in. He often approached older women, especially those who struggled with alcohol. They were easy to lure. He promised them drinks, food, and a place to sleep. Many of them, desperate for warmth and companionship, followed him back to his apartment. But once inside, the reality was far darker. Fritz's relationships with these women were not built on affection. He used them to fill the emptiness inside him. But his frustration, his impotence, and his hatred often turned violent. By the early 1970s, Fritz Honka had crossed a line. He was no longer just a lonely drunk. He had become a killer. Chapter 5. The murders begin. In 1970, Fritz committed his first known murder. His victim was Gertrude Breuer, a woman he had picked up from the Golden Glove. After drinking heavily, the night turned violent. Fritz strangled her in his apartment. In a panic, he dismembered her body, cutting it into pieces to make disposal easier. But instead of getting rid of the remains properly, he hid them inside his apartment, in plastic bags and behind walls. This became his method. Over the next few years, Fritz killed at least 4 women. All were older, vulnerable, often struggling with addiction. Their names included Anna Buchel, Frieda Fiete-Roblick, Ruth Schult. Each one met the same fate: lured from the pub, killed in his apartment, dismembered, and hidden. Fritz thought he was clever. He never tried to dump the bodies far away. He simply hid them in his own home. But he couldn't hide the smell. Chapter 6. A House of Horrors. Neighbors in Zeitstrasse complained constantly about the odor from Fritz's apartment. The stench was unbearable. Thick, sour, sickly sweet. Fritz always had an excuse. He claimed it was rotten meat, or garbage, or the cats that often wandered in. For years, people believed him. No one imagined that inside his apartment were bags of human remains, slowly decomposing. Visitors occasionally noticed something odd. Some described bundles wrapped in plastic. Others said the smell was so bad they couldn't stay long. But Fritz always brushed it off. The truth was horrifying. His apartment had become a graveyard. His bed stood just a few feet from hidden corpses. He lived, ate, and slept, surrounded by death. Chapter 7. The stench that wouldn't go away. By 1974, the smell from Fritz's apartment was impossible to ignore. Neighbors gagged in the hallways. Some threatened to call authorities. Still, nothing was done. Fritz's victims were women society had overlooked. Alcoholics, the homeless, prostitutes. No one reported them missing. No one searched for them. Fritz continued to drink at the Golden Glove, continuing his cycle of loneliness, lust, and violence. But fate would finally catch up with him. Chapter 8. The Fire and the Discovery. On July 17, 1975, a fire broke out in Fritz's apartment building. The flames spread quickly, and firefighters rushed in to control the blaze. When they entered Fritz's apartment, they made a shocking discovery. Among the debris and smoke, they found bags filled with body parts. The fire had exposed what Fritz had hidden for years. Investigators pulled out the remains of at least 4 women. The horror of Zeitstrasse was finally revealed. Chapter 9. Trial and Prison. Fritz's trial began in 1976. The courtroom was packed. Reporters called him the Monster of St. Pauli. People were fascinated and horrified by the man who had lived unnoticed among them. Fritz admitted to the killings, but claimed he couldn't control himself. He blamed alcohol. He blamed his impotence. He said the women mocked him, and he lashed out in rage. Psychologists testified that Fritz had deep mental issues. He was sentenced not just to prison, but also to time in a psychiatric hospital. The final verdict: 15 years of imprisonment in addition to psychiatric treatment. For the families of the victims, it was justice, but justice delayed. Chapter 10: The Later Years. Fritz served his sentence quietly. He was released in 1993 after nearly 2 decades behind bars and under psychiatric care. By then, he was an old man, frail and forgotten. He lived out his final years in a nursing home under a different name. Few recognized him. Even fewer cared. On October 19th, 1998, Fritz Honka died at the age of 63. He passed away quietly, without family, without friends. The man who had lived surrounded by death ended his life in lonely obscurity. This was the story of Fritz Honka, the Monster of St. Pauli, a man whose crimes remind us how dangerous isolation, resentment, and neglect can become. If you found this documentary meaningful, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss future stories. And let us know in the comments, what do you think drives someone like Fritz Honka to commit such horrors? Until next time, stay safe, and remember the victims who deserve to be remembered.